This is the Code to Cash podcast.
Pricing is not a billing problem. Pricing is a code problem. Pricing is a product.
Price point is really the last thing that actually even matters.
You need to have the most atomic unit of your product, not your product.
Hello and welcome to the Code to Cash podcast. I'm your host Ajit. Today we have the amazing co-CEO and co-founder of Cal.com, Peer Richelsen. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. And if I mispronounce your name, I apologize. But I'm so excited to speak with you about all things Cal.com as well as monetization.
Hey, you're not the only one mispronouncing. I go by Peer Rich on Twitter for a reason, because Rich is kind of like a first/last name in the US. But yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, I would love to, dive right in. I've seen a little bit of your story on your website as well as LinkedIn pages, but I'm just curious to understand, like, your journey has been like so fast. The company has been around for a couple of years. So I just wanted to learn about your story a little bit before Cal.com, how you got the inspiration to build the company, and then we can discuss after that a little more about how you landed on your pricing structures as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I've been in tech for around 10, 11 years. Basically started with like an e-com store when I was like 17, 18. Later did some marketplace, some AI startup with computer vision, which was very interesting to like scan and recognize magic cards. It was like a very tiny niche, right? Like it was really hard to monetize. Then pivoted away from that AI marketplace to like a marketplace to buy and sell magic cards. So it's kind of like from the scanner to this marketplace e-com. We actually did YC in like winter 19, which feels like many aeons ago. 2019 was like, and ultimately, crazy. Ultimately failed. We had like a warehouse where we did like a bunch of shipping and retail, and had to close that down during COVID. It was also really hard to raise more funding for that startup during the height of COVID. And then I built a hiring marketplace called leanhire.com, which we're actually rebooting very soon. Very excited about that. And business was acquired by OnDeck, and I joined OnDeck as head of product with that acquisition. There's a bunch of reasons why we had to shut down that project then at OnDeck, and so I'm like able to restart leanhire.com. But now it's the interesting story behind LeanHire is that while running this hiring marketplace, I realized that the scheduling is really, really hard between companies and contractors and, the people they want to hire and recruiters. And there are solutions out there, Savical and Calendly and, all these different scheduling products, but they are as a SaaS product, very limited in terms of control, customizations. You rent software, right? Versus owning the software. And for me as a marketplace provider, it was really hard to build a marketplace that would like feel like it's my own. And there's a bunch of issues with a SaaS product. You don't get the data, you can't change the UI, you can't change the flow and everything. And it was running into a lot of issues. So ultimately, Calendly does not turn out to be a good solution for any marketplace, right? Like it's just not built for it.
Right.
And I was looking for an open source solution because in my mind, that's something that I was looking for. I was looking for something I could integrate deeply into my marketplace, that I could like self-host, that I could, manage and change every line of code. And, there's a bunch of open source solutions for, let's say, Firebase, which is Superbase, or for Intercom, there's many open source alternatives, Chatwood. And I was just Googling for Calendly open source, literally like on a weekend, and couldn't find a single result in that Google search. I only found a couple Hacker News and Reddit threads asking people if they knew like an open source Calendly, and everyone was like, no, but like please ping me if you find it. And so that day I was like, interesting. I wonder how many more people have this problem. And then you run the numbers and it's like, okay, there's tons of telehealth, there's tons of marketplaces and doctors and therapists and, personal trainers and coaching and all these different unique scheduling use cases that don't really have an open source like developer focused product. And so I started like landing page, outlined, what the mission of this project would be. And that was in like October 2020, while still running Lean Hire essentially as like, it was just a side project, like a GitHub project that I was like, okay, I don't want to build this in-house as like core IP. I want to focus on the marketplace. And then it turns out that project just gained a lot more attention from, the open source community, and people kept signing up every day. We were number one for the keyword on Google search for open source Calendly. Still are today. There's tons of traffic coming in from those two keywords. And ultimately, Lean Hire was then acquired, and I completely stopped working on this project because I joined in full time, and I had other priorities, and didn't really focus a single minute on it. But then people kept on signing up for the wait list and asking me, bugging me, hey, like, what's the state of the project? Is it dead? Is it not dead? And I'm like, oh, fuck, what am I going to do? And so I was really desperate. I went to Twitter, I went to my personal network, and I looked for someone to take over. I was like, hey, like, you get 90%, leave me with 10 or 15%. Like, just, it barely built out, nothing works. But like, I have this wait list with like over 1,000 people or something that like are eagerly to try it out. And no one really, I had a few calls, but no one really stood out, to be fair. And then my last desperate move was to send an email to everyone on the waitlist, because I knew developers signed up for the waitlist. And and then I met my co-founder, who was like number 3 on the waitlist or something. Like, wow, I don't know how he found it. Like, I should ask him, but he probably searched on Google and found it, like everyone else. And he replied, it was exactly his stack. He just quit his job previously, and he was like super down, and it wasn't even about like starting a venture-based business, right? It was just like, hey, I want to hack on this. And so we agreed on like a prenup contract saying like, yeah, you can like work as a contractor, and if you like it, and if I like it, we can like continue the engagement and figure out if we like working together. And he did that for like 2-3 weeks. His name is Bailey, by the way. I didn't say Bailey Pumfleet. He was my co-CEO and co-founder. And this prenup actually turned into something where I said, okay, before we launch this and before this goes crazy, like, if there's ever a chance for me to rejoin, like, I'd love to rejoin in full time with 50-50 ownership, because I've put in like the upfront work, and he's joining like a bit later, so I'd love to, but if I don't join and you just keep on running this, like, and I have other things to focus on, like, it would be like a 80-20 or 90-10 or something equity split. And turns out that it was I don't know if it was the right choice, but like, I rejoined in full time, and we launched on Product Hunt, and it was like immediately product of the day, of the week, of the month. I think it was like in the top 10 of product of the year that year, so almost made that. And then Hacker News piled up, and everyone was going crazy, and the website was shit, and the product was so early. It was almost embarrassing how early the product was, but people really loved it, and joined the community, and since then we're here now. So that's kind of like the origin story.
Amazing story. I was actually a little curious about your start on the marketplace side of things. And it seems like almost a little bit more advanced use case. Like, it was not just that these were like non-open source software. It was also the case that they were not even offering like the functionality that you were looking for. Yeah. What would be like an example that you would have to like actually needed to build yourself in this case, like in the marketplace example?
So for the marketplace, there's a tech problem, but there's also a business problem. And the business problem is that all of these SaaS products cost like minimum $9 to $20 a month per user. And if you have a marketplace with like 5,000 users, your bill is going to explode your house. Right. So from a business point of view, it doesn't make sense, which means our marketplace product, we have 2 products. We have the classic SaaS as well, similar to everyone else. But we also have a more embedded form product. We call it platform because that's what you're building with it, which is not per user, but per booking. And so it scales much better with your whatever project you're working on. So that's from a business point of view, very different. But the second thing is we also build up this entire console. We call it console.cal.com, where you can basically maintain and manage your user base that's using your product, right? So you're not only getting the source code for building a marketplace, but there's also tons of things like user management, creating users, deleting users, moving events around, or rescheduling, having like some sort of admin god mode over like what's happening, analytics, insights,
completely.
what's happening inside my platform. And those
Understood.
things are just a black box in everyone else's product, right? Because they are not built
Right.
for marketplaces.
Understood completely. Yeah, what I would love to do is dive a little bit deeper on the pricing. You mentioned there are different metrics, right? For enterprises, it's per booking, but for others, it's it's a different plan. But before going there, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the commercial open source philosophy, which I know you've spoken about. Like, first, you've made a decision for open source because it seems like that was your problem, like you were trying to solve that. And I'm curious about like commercial open source versus open source versus traditional SaaS. Like, how does the actual economics of the business change? Like, how do you have to run a company like this that is different from, let's say, a traditional venture-backed SaaS company?
Yeah, it's very different. I would even argue that we are not really competing with any SaaS business because both the customer is different, the playbook is different, the strategy is different, the go-to-market is different.
Right.
If you have a direct competitor, iPhone versus Android, it's kind of like you compare on specs, but no one's really comparing it on specs. Like the people we sell to are very different to the people who other SaaS companies sell to because of the open source nature. And so the margins are very interesting because you have a free product. Like it is there. Yeah. The code is open and anyone can clone and fork your repo and run it locally. So that's obviously a huge drawback, but we're also living in a world where most SaaS products have a free tier and then you upgrade, right? So in that regard, I think there's very little risk if someone's like, oh, I don't want to give away my code for free. Technically, most companies are already doing that. Like the code is rarely the asset, right? Like it's the network effects, it's the branding, it's the support you're getting that is typically worth the money. And so we have an enterprise license the same way GitLab has a community edition and an enterprise edition, which has a bunch of more features that you don't need if you're like a hobby engineer. So in that regard, we're very friendly towards like single mom and pop engineers or like hobby engineers. But then if you need like single sign-on and like audit logs and all these enterprise heavy features, you would then acquire a license, which is, just a piece of paper essentially. And the margins of royalties is obviously amazing. We don't provide, hosting is optional, but like technically you could acquire like a self-hosted license the way you would buy an SVG, like a logo, right? And so you buy the right to use that source code. And so on the one hand, you have like terrible margins because you're giving away 90% of the product for free. But then you also are selling to enterprise companies and governments and highly regulated industries and healthcare. There's a lot of budget for scheduling, for of course, that you kind of like make that up. And our philosophy is always to be inclusive for everyone. We just want to make it as accessible as possible.
Makes sense. So the enterprise license, is that like a one-time fee that then purchases that right to use the product? Does it work? So is it closer to like the pricing model for on-prem software in that case?
We actually made the decision to make it an ongoing license on a monthly basis that is based per booking. So we do have an anonymous API call, an API call that just tells us this company made one booking more. There's no metadata, no personal data attached, and so we track how much a company is booking per month. Because as funny as it sounds, even though the source code is free, the company would say, oh, why does it scale with bookings? But also our support requirements scale with their company, right? Like so the only way we can sell them good support is, if you have 1 million bookings, you're going to need an engineer from our end. You're going to, require 24/7 support. And that only works if we have something that's like, that works for you. Because it's an ongoing thing, scheduling is really hard. Yeah.
Makes sense. And so that piece is still the, like when they will host. But I also saw the pricing page on your website where you are hosting the products themselves. So I would love to dive in a little bit on the pricing approach even there, because as a individual user, when I looked at Cal.com, like, oh, now I don't have to pay for Calendly use, which I like even personally felt like I didn't have that much money to, today I have like 5 or 6 SaaS software, which I was never used to paying for.
It stacks. And it stacks up, I mean, it's not like, oh, anyone can afford $20. No, you have 10, 20 products that all ask for $20, and suddenly you're looking at a bill of like 300 a month. And, you know,
Right.
we are in a recession, and I think, you know, our philosophy, as I said before, is to make scheduling as like accessible as possible, like
Right.
accessible for everyone. And so we made the very, I'd say, amazing decision. Looking back, it was probably one of the best decisions we made to make the product for individuals free. We've seen that with Figma. You know, Figma is an amazing product. Like, it's mind-blowing how much they give away for free, but then charge on the team features. We call it single player, multiplayer. And so
Yep.
the single player product is completely free. But then when you need like collective events where you have team members or round robin or routing, or, you know, when you have like a little bit more complex use case, you're likely working in a company, right? And the company has budget for this. But like if you're an individual, like a yoga teacher or someone who gives music lessons or someone who records podcasts, right? Like,
Right.
that is, and we have a Riverside integration, by the way, which we're using right now, which none of the others have. Oh, maybe. I don't know.
Right.
Let me check. I don't think so. But so we wanted to make sure that this is just, yeah, as free as possible for people to adopt. And also, I think what's interesting for the scheduling space is there are companies who do, you know, marketplace scheduling, infrastructure heavy. Those companies are purely focused on APIs. They don't have a consumer-facing product. They do door-to-door sales. They, you know, pick up the phone and call the company that builds the next marketplace. And I think that's really hard to build a big business because, you know, if your tech only scales by your sales team, then you have a pretty big problem. And then there's the consumer-facing side of scheduling, which does all this, you know, consumer things very good, but they don't have this exponential marketplace potential with, you know, hitting one or two big marketplaces. And so
Understood.
we kind of made like the hybrid where we have a free consumer product, but it's not really our like main business monetizer. It's just free marketing, you know, and every
Right.
user who has a good experience sends their link to their friends, and their friends book them, and they have a good experience, and they make a cal.com account, and then they share it to the head of engineering of the next marketplace.
Makes sense. I'm just, one of the things when it comes to this sort of models, especially as a pricing person, is, you know, initially you have like the free plans, and what traditional SaaS companies, the challenge that they fall under is they'll have a lot of subscription on the free plan, a lot of people who want to use it, and the conversion rates are generally low. I'm wondering, is that actually goes to your favor in this case? Like, since you're fundamentally an open source company, you're actually wanting more free plan subscription, and you're probably okay with not that high of a conversion versus a traditional SaaS company where they're worried more about the conversion rate. I'm just wondering, like, is that a different conversation that you're having between like the people changing plans?
So I wrote a blog post about the conversion rates and the challenges of commercial open source, and basically you are playing a numbers game in a sense where if your open source software doesn't touch like millions, potentially billions of people,
Right.
you will have a tough time making a big business because there's just so much free usage. I mean, think about Docker, right? Like Docker made an entire new category, you know, containerized software that didn't exist before. And if you ask any engineer, they will know or have used Docker in the past or use it actively, but they're not paying a dime, right? Like none of them are paying for Docker, for this intensive software. And so my hint is always to, you know, if you want to build, let's say, $100 million business, you need to find a way to sell to 1 billion people. Not
Right.
1 billion end users, right?
Yeah,
But like 1 billion people have to eventually touch your software. And, you know, if Docker powers Netflix, then
Completely.
there you go. You have 30 million more users.
Completely.
And so yes, the conversion rate is way worse. Well, lower, just different, right? But I do think you're opening up yourself to markets that have a lot higher margins, like governments and highly regulated industries that make it up for it.
Understood. Yeah, this is what I would like. This is the interesting phenomena that the adoption is basically becomes a requirement. Where in a traditional SaaS company, you're a little bit confused about, do I go up market? Do I try for adoption? And we met actually when I was publishing a Scott Williamson's interview at our podcast, and we were discussing the GitLab example where first they thought they gave too much, and then they reduced how much they gave, and that dynamic continues to happen. But you're sort of in the commercial open source model, just put all your eggs into the adoption basket and say, adoption is what we're going for, and then that is what will make our economics work.
Yeah, and so far, I mean, I think the biggest lesson for open source companies is to have like a lot of runway, because if we've known anything about open source, that like it's not something where you build something, you get money immediately, because even big companies don't pay a lot, or they don't sponsor, or they don't pay back open source contributors. And we have a lot of freemium open source that like are maintained by 4 individuals who do it on a free basis because no one's willing to pay. And so my advice typically is to raise a lot of runway and have a good enterprise strategy in mind that you can like grow into. And you don't just start selling into enterprise after a month, right? Like we've learned the hard way that some of those deals just take 12 months to go live, from like 6 months of closing and then 6 months of implementation until you make the first real revenue. But then also other companies just don't look at you if you're younger than 3 years, because they're like, okay, if we want to filter out, the bad beans who die. And so we were very lucky in a sense where we hit obviously peak of the market last year in terms of fundraising, but also we have a very small team that is very dedicated and growing fast, and the product is growing fast, that we probably don't need to think about runway at all. I think we're at like 18 to 20 years of runway at this current team. And so it's good to show. It's funny because it becomes a sales argument, because if we sell to big and large enterprise companies, they want us to be around. They don't want to buy someone's hobby software and then they integrate it and then they're gone, right? And so having this type of runway, and some companies plan on a 5 to 10 year horizon, like it's only the startups that have like 30 months of runway, but like if you're a public company or Fortune 500 or something, your time horizon is a lot longer than 5 to 15 months.
Is the increased runway also a factor? Like, is there a type of function that you're maybe not hiring? Like maybe, I would imagine your sales teams would be like, since everything is dependent on the open source model for developers to mostly find you. I'm just curious, like, are there functions you don't even
for sure.
like hire? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the beauty of open source is that obviously you give everything away for free, but you're also getting so much. You get so much love from the community and people fixing bugs, translating. I think we're like at almost 30 languages compared to the rest of the market, which has like 7 languages or something. And so we have Arabic, Hebrew, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, traditional Chinese, simplified Chinese, Vietnamese, Russian, like Ukrainian. Those languages we don't speak, right? Like, so the community comes up and be like, hey, I want to translate this. I want to contribute. I want to help. This is awesome. And, that's another 100 grand. That's another 50 grand. That's another $500,000 for something that you don't put on your own payroll. It's kind of like this grassroots movement. And so that's a huge bonus, right? You give away technology for free that costs you $2-3 million to produce, but you also getting at least a small amount back from the community. But also the sales team, people love it. People share it with their friends, their developer friends. We have a single sales guy next to me who's helping me out with the sales. And if it was a classic door-to-door enterprise marketplace, a SaaS product, we would probably have 2 engineers and 12 salespeople, right? Like it's kind of like the opposite.
Right. Closer to like the e-commerce like companies that you were talking about before, like the big commerce.
Correct.
Yeah. I just wanted to finally maybe pivot a little bit into the tech stack that lets it all happen. So what I've observed, and partly our podcast is all code to cash, because one of the things we were realizing is it's very hard for monetization to work without implementing it technically correctly. So I'm curious what, if anything, you've internally to either there's monitoring of conversion, you want to make sure people are paying for their plans. Are there other things like maybe sometimes people want to have different plans and change feature flags on and off? What sort of infrastructure did you have to build to have this just work on its own?
So we started making early revenue quite early, I think like in month 2 or 3 of like just people buying a license, and the license was like just, hey, here you go, whatever we build comes. And I don't know if it was a good investment for those companies or not in the early days. It's definitely now. So go check it out and get a license. So that didn't require a lot of all of those things you mentioned. We're slowly building out those things. We have a billing portal now. We have a self-serve sign-up portal now to get a SaaS account, but also get a license key for your self-hosting deployment. So those things really took time to build out and also get right. We're now experimenting with feature flags, as you mentioned, in a sense. If you run a self-hosted instance, you could turn off features yourself as well. Right now, you need to go into the code and like remove it from the menu bar if you don't want to show that link. And so our hope is that we can make the product very customizable without touching lines of code. That way, it's just, you don't have Git conflicts when you like merge conflicts when you pull the latest updates. So those things are coming, but they're coming quite late into, let's say, our time of monetization. But those things bring a lot of more, I'd say, conversion or ease of use. Most of it is just easing our customer support, right?
Yep. Well, those are most of my pricing and monetization questions, Pierre. It's just a model that I found very fascinating. Is there anything else you would like to cover? Anything else you would like to make sure we help publicize for you?
Yeah, I think when you talk about monetization, I think our main KPIs are obviously, monthly revenue growth. We've just had a fantastic month last month with Hacker News going viral. I think we had like plus 80 or 78% revenue growth from one month to the other, which is just
wow, amazing.
Like that's crazy. So that's great. But also the other metrics are just stickiness, like how much churn. I think, let me actually look in the live data. It's like live churn is at, we try to keep churn obviously as any company wants to keep churn low, but oh no, Stripe changed their dashboard. Did they? Did they just change the dashboard? Oh dear, I can't find shit. I think it's at okay, here we go, churn. Okay, so all-time churn is at 4%, which, that's amazing. It doesn't mean that everyone's still active, right? But it just means that there's, it's between 4 and 8%, and I think that's great place to be in. And then the other metric we care a lot about is virality, which is a metric we came up with to track how many guests of someone's Cal.com account joins as a user, right? So if you send your link to someone else who signs up then afterwards, that's like one data point for virality. And so those metrics combined, very sticky and very viral, just creates a very strong growth case.
Makes sense. Awesome. Those were most of my questions, Pierre. Thank you so much for your time again.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much.